Hello and good afternoon on this very wet and yucky Wednesday. As I said on Saturday's live session, I'm going to be trying to pop in here every couple of times a week, so that I can be checking in with you guys and really trying to do talks and do little videos that are relevant to you guys. And so a few people got in touch and gave me some ideas of what they wanted me to talk about. And what I want for anybody watching these videos is to do the same. If there's any topics that you want me to talk about, then please do message me, either private message me or message me in the group. And if there's anything that I'm talking about throughout this video, then message me in the comments box so I can respond to that straight away. So hello to the ladies watching so far. So one of the things that I want to talk about today is compromising in relationships. And I was just making a few notes on this morning, and I realized that this is a really massive topic. So I'm actually going to do this in two parts, and I'm going to do the second part on Saturday morning, because I want to do compromising in relationships. And then I also really, which I think is also as important, is like what not to compromise in relationships. And they overlap, all of this overlaps quite a lot, and so I'm going to try and make it as succinct as possible, but as I say, like tap any comments that you want to, and I will try and make it as relevant to you guys as possible. So first of all, I suppose what would be really helpful is to think about what actually compromise means, and recognize that it often means different things to different people. So most of you will know that as well as doing coaching for women, I also do relationship therapy and counselling, and that was what I was doing before that was like my predominant role before I came into doing coaching. So I've met with loads of couples, and this idea of compromise comes up time and time again. So to think about compromise and what compromise means, and what's the difference between compromising and, well, what's compromising, negotiating and settling. So no secret that compromising is where both of you have got different views about something, and then you meet in the middle. Now, the reason why I just want to spend a bit of time just thinking about what compromise means is because I think genuinely it does mean different things to different people. And I can remember somebody once saying to me that a compromise, I mean, this is very light-hearted, but a compromise is one of you wanting Chinese for dinner, the other one wanting a curry for dinner, and then both of you settling on pizza. And I don't think that's a really good example of what a compromise is. Like that, you might think, well, that is, but to my mind, a compromise is where you both have a different idea about what you want, and usually feel quite strongly about it, and then you come to an agreement whereby you are both happy with the outcome. Because that's the crucial part for me, is that it's not a compromise if neither of you, or if one of you isn't happy. And so what often happens in relationships is that one person often ends up kind of winning more than the other person. And so what will happen is that in the work that I do, usually women will come to me and feel like everything, within relative terms, everything feels like a compromise, and that they are the only one that's doing the work, that is reducing their desires or their wants or their needs or their values in order to appease their partner, because the partner is the one that kind of either speaks the loudest or holds their ground for the longest. That's not compromise. That's just not playing fair. So the whole point of having a good compromise in a relationship is that you are able to sit down and negotiate. And negotiate feels like a bit of a funny word to use in a relationship, but ultimately relationships are about negotiating, because unless you are absolutely two peas in a pod, you're going to have differences of opinions, and those differences of opinions can be on like various different things, and I'm going to go through a few of them later. But if you're not able to work that out fairly so that you both feel like you have been heard and listened to, and that you've come to an agreement that makes you both happy, then that's not compromise. That's just winning an argument for right or for wrong. So there's two things there. First of all, it's about understanding how you disagree. So some people like to raise their voice. Some people like to really dig their heels in, and some people actually just like to back down and walk away because they can't actually be bothered with the aggro that comes with it. So the very first part of any of it is about being able to actually understand how you actually work out conflict and how you work out disagreements, so that you're never in a position where you feel like you're only ever appeasing your partner, or that you're only ever winning because your partner doesn't really have a voice and doesn't really have a say. Excuse me. And as I said, that's not what this is about. There may be some things where you feel really strongly about something, and then you have to kind of work your way through it so that you come to an amicable agreement that isn't a compromise, that is literally an either or situation. But we're talking about compromise today, so that's where I'm going to stay. What are the benefits of compromising in a relationship? Well, there are all sorts of benefits to that, and they pretty much come down to being able to build trust. I think ultimately building a trusting, loving relationship, because if you are not feeling like you are, as I said, being heard, and that you are being that your opinion is being valued, then ultimately what that then does is open the door to resentment. And opening the door to resentment in a relationship is pretty toxic, because the resentment, I always think about resentment as being a little bit like a coffee stain. Like you can wash it away, but it never actually really goes away. And so any other areas or sources of conflict that then come on top of that, because that resentment's already there, it just starts to feel quite toxic. So being able to have a relationship where you are able to negotiate these things builds trust, and also with that trust brings about a sense of security, and being able to have a disagreement and know that your relationship is safe, and is that you're valued ultimately. So if we think about different areas of conflict and what kind of compromise and what things usually come up with either the couples that I work with or the women that I work with. So one of the things that regularly comes up is, so basically like sex and money are the two. Sex, money and parenting are the three that I think regularly come up. As I said, chuck your messages in if you want me to be able to add on any of that. So let's think about money. Let's think about how money gets spent and what is the compromise there around money, because it can be, money is a source of conflict for pretty much most relationships in some way, shape or form. Like for some people a lot less, for some people a lot more. And there's a whole thing around, like, do you have a joint account? Do you keep your money separate? Who I mean, and this is a really yucky one, but like, who earns the most money, and then does that person then have the right to? So I worked with a woman last year where her partner earned significantly more money than she did, like double or triple, if not more, really. But as far as the household bills were concerned, everything got absolutely split in half. So even though she was earning much less, he would obviously have considerably more money left at the end of the month, whereas she would have absolute peanuts. And I just always remember that session of just thinking, wow, that just feels really unfair. Because if you're in a partnership, I mean, and this is my opinion, right? This isn't, you may completely disagree with this. This is completely my opinion. Well, first of all, love is give and take, right? So anything in a relationship is give and take. That's the whole point of compromise. And if you are in a partnership and you are living together and you are building a home together and going to be building a family together, then I just don't really feel very comfortable with the whole, this is mine, what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, because it feels like that's not really how you would want to be building a life together. Although I do understand that there are caveats to that. But having her having like 50 quid left over at the end of the month and having him having like £1,500 left over at the end of the month just felt really unfair. And I wondered in that situation whether the compromise was that the household bills should be paid proportionately to the income rather than just 50-50. And that was something that they went away and she went away and they discussed, and that was something that they put into effect. But that felt like that was quite a simple solution, but obviously loaded with lots of feelings and emotions. But it it wasn't about, because it kind of felt like it was about like who worked harder and who deserved their money more, and that just felt terribly unfair. I don't know if that's making sense to you, but I felt like the compromise there was actually that they were to work out proportionately the bills, and that then put them on a level where, okay, fine, she still had less disposable income at the end of the month, but she had considerably more. So I've talked about this in previous videos before. So my husband and I have been together for nearly 13 and a half years now, and we've lived together for pretty much most of that time. We've been married for 10 and a bit years, and we only got, and I'm only saying this because it makes me smile, it's quite relevant, I think, we only got a joint bank account like literally, I don't know, about a year ago, 2 years ago. Not for any like bad reason, but just, I mean, he was really worried that I was going to be really protective over like how we decided to spend money. He felt like it was going to be just a source of contention in our relationship, which, like at no point has money ever really been a source of contention in our relationship, because like I just said to you before, I believe that we are in a partnership and we have a house together, and that's just how it is. But when we finally came to getting a joint bank account together, I knew he was really anxious about like what bills were allowed to go in and what bills weren't allowed to go in, and were we allowed to spend it on this and where we were. So we ended up having the conversation about what we thought was right and what was fair. So if I was going to be going out with my girlfriends for drinks or for dinner, or I was going to be going out shopping and buying myself stuff, then obviously that would come out of my own bank account. But if it was anything to do with the house, anything that was joint for us, or anything to do with the children, then it obviously comes out of the joint account. But if we're caught short and we need to use the joint bank account for anything, then we just use the joint bank account. Like it's really not a big deal. But the compromise there was about making sure that we'd had that conversation beforehand, so that we weren't at any point surprised about what was or what wasn't going in and out of the account. And we put in however much we can put in week by week, and that feels like it's fair. I suppose the point that I'm trying to make is that with any kind of issue around money, and with any kind of issue about anything, like anything at all to do with relationships, it's all about communication. Like pretty much everything that I do in the work that I do usually boils down to communication and how that information is shared, and how that is, well, how it's shared and how it's received by your partner and by yourself. So if there are any issues that are around money, and this comes back to my first point, it's about being able to have the conversation and being able to understand that money is a really emotive subject. And so let me go back to like how you argue and how you resolve conflict, because it's so important. If you've got somebody that's very shouty, or you've got somebody who is very inflexible, or at the other end of the spectrum you've got somebody who just doesn't like conflict at all and shies away, then that's a real power imbalance in the relationship, and that means that you're very unlikely to be able to regularly come to a good compromise. So being able to have a conversation in a really calm state is really important, because if at any point one person raises their voice and the other one backs down, or let's be honest, what happens with most couples, is that two people end up raising their voices. That's just an absolute, it's just pointless. I think it's pointless to have an argument where you're both shouting at each other, because when you're both shouting at each other, you're not listening to what the other person is saying. Like that's probably the most important thing. When you're shouting, your blood, your heart rate rises, the blood's pumping around you a lot quicker, you're not listening to what the other person is saying, all you're doing is trying to work out your response, and in that kind of situation, I would say it's pretty much pointless. So warning signs, triggers that you need to recognize either for yourself or to share with your partner, is that once you get up to, I reckon, once you get to like 5 out of 10, I do this kind of like barometer with couples in conflict. Once one of you gets to 5 out of 10, you need to learn to walk away, because going above 5 out of 10, once you hit 6 out of 10, you can't actually come back down. Same applies for anxiety, actually. If anybody here suffers with anxiety, once you hit 5, so you want to be able to keep it at 4 or below. Let's keep with anger, just to keep it simple. Once you hit 5, you're going into red territory, and once you've gone to 6, it's almost impossible to bring it back down without somebody walking away. So being able to understand that in each other, and being able to say to each other at times of difficult conversations, this is how we're going to do it, and if I feel at any point this is where we're going up here, I'm going to walk away, or you need to walk away. And then the rule is that you're not allowed to follow each other. So if one of you walks out of the room to calm down, the other person is by like absolutely not allowed to go out and follow, because that just then doesn't really stop the argument, it just takes it into a different room. So that's finances. Sex, right? Sex always comes up. So usually, but absolutely not exclusively, usually men want more sex than women. Not exclusively, just usually. And so what happens then is you can get into quite a difficult situation then around one person wanting sex, let's say 5 times a week or every day, and the other person not wanting sex more than every couple of weeks. And then what happens is that you get into this weird kind of dynamic around what is what is expected, what have you got to do to keep your partner happy, even if you don't want to do it. Usually after a while, one can become quite standoffish and quite closed down, because you feel like all your partner ever wants to do is have sex, or it's just kind of like badgering you all the time, and it becomes like a real kind of vicious circle around you want sex all the time, the other person doesn't, or vice versa, and then it can lead to conflict, it can lead to arguments, and it can lead to resentment, that resentment coming in again. So one really good way of managing that, again, is to talk about it and to be able to find a compromise whereby you're both happy with that. Now, I can't sit here and tell you what that compromise is, because that's completely down to you and your partner to be able to discuss and work out what's absolutely right for you. What I can say though, and I can say this really confidently, is that even though the argument, if you like, is about sex, and by sex I mean like action, usually it's not about that. Actually, when it actually comes down to the crunch, usually what it is about is intimacy and affection. And there is the compromise. There, that is the nub. I would say for 80% of the couples that I've worked with, that's where it's at. Because I think particularly as women, like we're in a women's group, so I can say as women, most of the time we're just knackered, let's be honest, absolutely knackered. Childcare, working, house, domestic, cooking, laundry, doing everything, working, running your own business, being an employed, like whatever it is. I reckon being a mum is pretty bloody hard work, to be honest with you. And I would say for most women, sex just is not at the top of the pile. Like, I think I can pretty confidently say that, to be honest with you. But then what happens is that when your partner is then feels deprived of affection and intimacy, it can then become a bit of a nag fest about just, it can feel like all it's about is sex, but it's actually not. It's about intimacy and it's about affection. It's about having those moments where you can still have a kiss and a cuddle, where you can hold hands, where you can sit on the sofa together, where you can have a conversation without one of you looking at your phone. It might be having a little bit of a mooch in bed, but not necessarily doing the full shebang. Like it can be so many different things, but I guarantee you, as I said, I reckon 80% of the couples that I've worked with where sex has been an issue, it actually comes down to intimacy and affection and not actually the full act of sex. So again, that's the compromise, possibly. You know, as I said, I can't tell you guys like what you need to be doing with your sex life, but I do think that is a definite compromise in terms of how to, like, maybe you do need to have sex a little bit more often. Like maybe once a month is a bit I don't know, is that unfair? I probably think that is, but you know, that's, you know, as I said, totally down to you guys. But it's just about being able to have the conversation and being able to come up with, remember I said right at the beginning, compromises where you're both happy with it. If you're not both happy with the agreement that you've come to, it's not a compromise. It's one person settling and the other person winning. And that there's a time and a place for that. There is a time and a place for that. But I wouldn't say that is how a general relationship conversations should go. Okay, so that's money, that's sex. Okay, so the third one that always comes up then is parenting and parenting issues and what to do if you have very different parenting styles. Now, this one is always really interesting for me, and this one really comes down to so much of the work that I do in terms of understanding your values and beliefs around raising children. And those values and beliefs inevitably stem from your own childhood and your own experience of family life growing up. Now, let me just hold that there. That doesn't mean that you will mimic how you were raised. It doesn't mean that at all. Because you can be raised in a way and then want to do it very differently and go on to do it very differently. I've talked about that in a more complex way in a different video, and I'm not going to go into that now. But let's just say in the main, we learn about love from how we are raised, and be that good or bad. I would say the majority of the time, we bring quite a lot of that into our parenting style, but not all of it. It's not exclusive. But what is really important to understand is that you and your partner were raised completely differently in completely different families, and usually, if not exclusively, when there are issues around parenting, the words that I will always hear are, we come from really different backgrounds. And that those are words that I hear so often. And it's so important to acknowledge that, and to give that the space that it needs. Because when we acknowledge that, we are already open to understanding that we come from different places. Now, just because you come from different places and you've had very different experiences growing up, it doesn't mean that there isn't a compromise to be had. In fact, having children together is probably the ultimate compromise. Like, let me just think about that for a minute. I can't think of any other thing in a relationship or in a family life where you don't compromise more than you do on how you raise your children, because people just have such different experiences, but also such different expectations around what to do. And these things can come, funnily enough, so who was I talking to yesterday? Somebody was saying, so I was talking to somebody yesterday who was saying they don't even have children yet. And she was saying, like, we had this really interesting conversation because he just pulled out of the air that he's really against vaccinating children. I think they'd been having a conversation about like the coronavirus vaccination, and her partner had said, oh, he doesn't believe in vaccinating children, and it led to this kind of like mind-blowing conversation, which my client was saying yesterday, like, it hadn't even entered her brain that anybody would be anti-vaccination. And so it felt really important for them to be able to have that conversation. But it can come up to loads of different things, and it can come down to, you know, whether or not this is a really contentious one for me. Whether or not you believe in smacking children. I'm not going into that now. Whether or not you believe in smacking children. If you don't believe in smacking children, what kind of punishment or what kind of boundary setting do you put in place? How do you put that into effect? What does that look like? What are the rules around like iPhones and iPads? I mean, God, that's got to be relevant to every single parent in the world at the moment, about like how much time the kids are spending on their blimmin' phones and what have you. Pocket money, bedtimes, dinner times, treats, like you name it. Like, there are, I could sit here for hours talking about it. How do you negotiate it if you feel really strongly about it? And that's the thing. And I think that's really where, again, communication, all comes down to communication. Sorry to sound like a broken record. Where you're able to really talk about your values, and not just about your own values about parenting, but actually like your own experiences, as I've said, of being parenting as a child are crucial in parenting conversations, crucial. But it's also really about recognizing what feelings come up for you. And I'll tell you what, as I'm talking to you about this now, I'm getting tight in my chest, not because my husband and I actually are pretty much on the same page when it comes to parenting, most of it. But just because I understand with my clients that this is a really, really, really tricky issue. And when we talk about values of parenting and we talk about how we negotiate the differences in how we raise our children, we cannot do that without being in tune with our own experience of being raised as a child. It feels like such a massive statement for me to be saying, but I genuinely believe it, because unless you are able to be really in tune with those feelings, and as I said, tight feelings in the chest now for me, just even saying it, you can't, right, the whole point of today's talk is about compromise. And there's no way you can negotiate a compromise around parenting or about sex or about money or about any of the other things that we've talked about so far without being really clear about what your values are. And this is the bit about parenting. It's about knowing what you're holding on to and why you are holding on to it. Because we can hold on to stuff because that's how it was for me, and so therefore it's right, or that's how it was for me and I never ever ever want it to be like that for my kids. But until you are able to really understand those feelings, and for a lot of mums, and I'm saying, well, this is a women's group, so I'm speaking to the women here. I'm not excluding men from anything that I'm saying. There's an 80-20 rule to everything. But once we can be so protective as mothers, and we can be so, I don't mean opinionated. I don't mean like opinionated, like we are always right. But I think we can hold on to stuff that we want for our children with absolutely the right reasons, like for all of the right reasons. But it can sometimes be wrong. And that's where, when I work with my clients and we talk about any of the issues that are coming up for them, either as issues of self or issues of relationship, it so much of it comes back down to our experience of being raised, our experience of being loved, how we witnessed love, how we received love, and how we understand love. Then when you're into arguments about what the kids should be doing and what the kids shouldn't be doing, you are coming from a much more informed place. And you are able to then be able to say, yes, this is right. This is how I feel really strongly about it. And this is what I need you to understand about why I feel so strongly about this. If you're just going into a space where you're just kind of, I'm right and you're wrong, and I can shout louder than you, or I can respond in this way or that way, that's not creating a place to create compromise. That's just in a place where you're digging your heels in and you're not really able to hear what the other person is saying. So, I mean, really and truthfully, like understanding where you've come from, I think really apply. I mean, anybody who's worked with me will know that understanding where you've come from is the core of all of the work that we do. Because by understanding where we come from, we learn so much about where we are now. So when we're looking at, and I always go on about communication so much, because if we're building on what we've learned growing up, and if we're building on how we've witnessed, not just witnessed love, not just how we've received love, but also how conflict has been negotiated within family life, how and I mean like family life, like usually obviously two parents, but not exclusively parents. This is about family as a unit. You bring so much of that into your adult life, and you bring so much of that into your relationship and into your family life. So if we're talking about compromising and learning how to compromise and being able to master the art of negotiation, then we can't separate ourselves from our past. Like, you just can't do it. You can be informed about it and then know how you want to do it differently. But if you're not in tune with it and you're not understanding why it raises the emotions and feelings in you that it usually does, as I say, especially around parenting, then you're never going to be in a strong enough position to be able to negotiate that. So actually somebody has asked me to do a separate video on the differences in parenting style. So I think I will do that as a separate video, because I know that that comes up. Today we've been talking just roundly on the topic of compromise. Got a few people that have just joined in now. So we've talked about the importance of compromise, the strength that it brings to your relationship, the trust and security. We've talked about how to compromise over financial issues. We've talked about how to compromise over issues around sex, and then parenting, which is the big one. And I think I'll do parenting as a standalone. But I suppose I've been warbling on for over half an hour now, so apologies. I suppose the one thing that I want you guys to hear the most is that being able to have a conversation which is difficult, which is conflicting, but that doesn't lead to an argument and doesn't lead to one person shouting over the other person, whether that be literally or metaphorically. No compromise can be had if you're not both heard, if you don't feel that you've been listened to, if you don't feel like you've been able to share your point of view safely, and if you're not both happy with the outcome. If you haven't done all of those things, it's very probably not a compromise. It's one person winning and the other person settling or backing down. I hope that's been helpful. I'm going to save this and post this back in the group for anybody who missed the beginning and might want to watch it again. Just to sum up what I said right at the very beginning, I'm going to be doing these lives twice a week, most likely on a Saturday and Wednesday, but there might be a bit of give or take depending on my work schedule. Please message me and let me know what topics you want me to talk about. You can do that either in the group. It's a closed group. Only we in the group can see it, so do feel free to write your comments in here. Alternatively, I know people do generally tend to prefer to private message me, and that's absolutely fine. So any topics you want me to talk about, message me, and I will catch up with you guys on Saturday morning sometime. I'll confirm what time, probably about 11 o'clock after I've done my client work. Have a lovely rest of day, and I hope you don't get too wet. Take care.